Dear all, welcome to this webinar. Our title today is Zero Deforestation Value Chains and Food Systems. My name is Tina Huvio and I work as a Program Director for Food and Forest Development Finland, FFD. FFD is organizing this webinar together with Fingo. And this is part of the series of webinars, which is assessing how do we achieve the systemic changes which are needed in agriculture and in natural resources management and for climate change. Deforestation is a great concern for all of us. It has also linkages to the biodiversity and its conservation. On the other hand, we know that it is estimated to be 2.4 billion people who still use wood and charcoal for their daily domestic needs. And we have approximately 1.5 billion people depending on smallholder farming and forestry. So it's not only the climate change, it's all these people that we have to be concerned about. We also received the latest report from IPCC at the end of February, and it underlines very nicely that we have to deal with inequalities. Without reducing inequalities, our possibilities to deal with the climate change or deforestation are limited. And this is one of the objectives of this webinar. We'll reflect how all these multiple objectives can be achieved. One of the issues is how to deal with the companies that the 6 commodity groups that the EU regulation dealing with deforestation is achieved. On the other hand, we have to think, how do we make sure that all these smallholders who depend on this value chain can earn their living and have a decent income. Before spending more time on this introduction, I would like to ask Jose to put our agenda on the screen. So I will guide you through the agenda and then I let the others to speak more than me. So we start with the introductory speeches, and then we have a short video greeting from Myanmar that we have produced in collaboration with the Finnish Church Aid. It describes nicely how the shifting cultivation and its linkages with the deforestation requires attention, and it's a good introduction to the discussion of today. Then we have a presentation by Professor Markku Kanninen. He's emeritus professor from the University of Helsinki and has dedicated his life and career to deal with tropical forests. After that, we have Maija Kaukonen from WWF, who will talk about the impacts of EU and Finnish consumption on tropical deforestation. After that, we have a panel discussion. And it seems that we have an all-female panel today. We have Anne Arvola from FinFund, a Senior Development Impact Advisor, Lea Rankinen from Paulik, Director of Sustainability and Public Affairs, Julia Wakeling, Head of Impact and ESG from Silver Street Capital, and finally, Elizabeth Simedala, President of Eastern African Farmers Federation. After that, we have a short session also for questions and answers. And then we have the concluding remarks by Juha Ruipo, who is in this event as a chairman of Fingo's Food Security Group. Without any further notice, I would like to ask Jose to put on the video greetings from Myanmar. Please, Jose.
Myanmarနိုင်ငံဟာစိုက်ပျိုးရေးနိုင်ငံဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ စိုက်ပျိုးရေးကဏ္ဍဟာနိုင်ငံစီးပွားရေးရဲ့အဓိကကြောရိုးဖြစ်ပါတယ်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့နယ်နိမိတ်ဟာဟိမဝေနာတောင်တန်းကနေမလေးကျွန်းဆွယ်အထိဖြန့်ကျက်ပြီးတရုတ်နိုင်ငံနဲ့အိန္ဒိယနိုင်ငံကြားမှာတည်ရှိပြီးတော့အရှေ့တောင်အာရှရဲ့မြောက်ဘက်အကျဆုံးနိုင်ငံဖြစ်ပါတယ် UNFAO 2016ရဲ့စစ်တမ်းအရမြန်မာနိုင်ငံဟာတစ်တော်ပြုံးသီးမှုအဆိုးရွားဆုံးနိုင်ငံတွေမှာပါဝင်နေပါတယ်နှစ်စဉ်ဆုံးရှုံးသွားတဲ့တစ်တော်ပမာဏဟာအာဆီယံနိုင်ငံတစ်နိုင်ငံဖြစ်တဲ့ဘရူနိုင်းနိုင်ငံရဲ့အရွယ်စားခန့်ရှိတယ်လို့2015မြန်မာ Time Report ကလည်းဖော်ပြထားပါတယ်2021မှာထုတ်ပြန်ထားတဲ့ Global Climate Risk Index အရရာသီဥတုဖောက်ပြန်မှုအန္တရာယ်ရာသီဥတုပြောင်းလဲမှုအန္တရာယ်ကြောင့်ထိခိုက်မှုအများဆုံးနိုင်ငံများရဲ့ကမ္ဘာလုံးဆိုင်ရာရာသီဥတုအန္တရာယ်ညွှန်းကိန်းမှာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံကအဆင့်1မှာဖော်ပြထားခြင်းခံထားရပါတယ်ကချင်ပြည်နယ်ဟာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမြောက်ဘက်ဆုံးပိုင်းမှာတည်ရှိပြီးတော့အရှေ့ဘက်မှာတရုတ်ပြည်သူ့သမ္မတနိုင်ငံအနောက်ဘက်မှာတော့အိန္ဒိယနိုင်ငံနဲ့နယ်နိမိတ်ချင်းထိစပ်နေပါတယ်ကချင်ပြည်နယ်မှာနေထိုင်တဲ့လူဦးရေ 1.8 တန်းနီးပါးဟာစိုက်ပျိုးရေးအဓိကအားဖြင့်ဆန်စပါးနဲ့အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းပြုကြပြီးတော့တွင်းထက်တပ်တုတူးဖော်ရေးလုပ်ငန်းဖြစ်တဲ့ကျောက်စိမ်းရွှေတူးဖော်ခြင်းလုပ်ငန်းတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်ကိုင်ကြပါတယ်မတူညီတဲ့နေရာအသုံးပြုမှုအလေးကျင့်ပုံစံမျိုးမျိုးနဲ့၎င်းတို့ရဲ့တစ်တော်များဖုံးလွှမ်းမှုပေါ်တရားမှုတို့ကြားဆက်ဆက်မှုများဟာလွန်ခဲ့တဲ့နှစ်ကာလများအတွင်းပိုမိုတိတာထင်ရှားလာပါတယ်အထူးသဖြင့်တစ်တော်ပြုံးသီးမှုများပေါ်တက်ရောက်နေတဲ့စိုက်ပျိုးရေးဆိုင်ရာအလေးအကျင့်များရဲ့အခန်းကဏ္ဍဟာအရေးပါလာပြီး၎င်းတို့အားထိန်းချုပ်ဖို့ရန်အတွက်အစပျိုးလှုပ်ဆောင်မှုများကိုဖြစ်ပေါ်စေခဲ့ပါတယ်အစားအသောက်စိုက်ပျိုးထုတ်လုပ်မှုစနစ်ကတစ်တော်ပြုံးသီးမှုပေါ်ဘယ်လိုအကျိုးသက်ရောက်နိုင်သလဲတစ်တော်ပြုံးသီးမှုကိုဘယ်လိုလျှော့ချနိုင်ပါသလဲ
ရင်းမျိုးတော့ရင်းမျိုး50နှစ်ရလောလောဆယ်ကောတဲ့ငိုကြောဆိုင်ပြကော6 eka ช่างไงแต่นิ่งก็อุปมามันบางชาอย่างทนิ่งก็มันก็ก็จะใส่ไม่บางชาใส่เลยแต่ยังก็นี่เสียบางชาไม่ใครชาใส่ได้สตามันสมท่าก็ลูกชิงได้ใส่สตามันมะลิก็ไว้ในได้ใส่แต่น้ำงาละก็มันติงได้ใส่ชาวละก็ยังก็มารังทุบไปทุบว่าใส่เลยนี่เชฟเป็นก็ไม่สูขายติงยิงขายมาสลาขายยาล้อเสียก็นั่งก็ได้ตรงนี้ชะไม่ใครเลยผมนี่ใครว่าอย่างก็อันถึงก็พิงใหญ่มาเรียมจัวติงคูมั่งคังก็กลมเชอระง่าเลยกลมเชอนู่ยังก็ยาก็เนี่ยจะมานู่ชิกาใส่อะไรกงเจนิงก็น้องก็เตะว่าแท้ฉันนี่เพื่อนนี่มีสาชกายังก็อันนี้ส่งก็มวยมีก็ไปจนไว้แต่ยังก็เนี่ยสาชกาหนามุงด้วยใส่แต่ก็ฉันถึงยามวยนี่จงก็ได้จูพึ่งจีทางนั่งได้ก็ได้ฉันถึงพึ่งก็รอนี่ง่ายเลยพึ่งก็บ้าก็ยองฉันถึงขั้นแก่มลายังก็พึ่งชอบว่าจนก็พิงว่าเลยผมก็แต่กูชอบว่าจนก็พิงอันถึงได้มุงพึ่งก็บ้าก็อันถึงแก่มฉันถึงยองแก่มพังแต่อันถึงพี่สายขี้ชาเลย 一时的人才看下来了，得哭下来，呀，得年轻，得年轻心，得哭了，碰个把我噻。Ningko, dai anh thỉnh thu miu ko nan ta ko marang kai chunga di ma anh thỉnh nang ko nga yang hung shika khai yang thawa ta ko marang kai chunga nang ko marang thu ai jeng ko cha wa dai khai ta dai man point ni ko yong jeng cha yang ko yong dai khu chung si wa le dai khu ping ye moi anh thỉnh pung ka na ko cái thế cái điểm từ đó cái thế nhiềuเลยได้มิวก็ดูอย่างจงก็cái thếจงก็กระก็งาที่มุงcái thếเนี่ยเสียงาหนาไอเลยใจก็มุ่งเจี๊ย
ကျွန်တော်တို့ဟာတစ်တော်ပြုံးသီးမှုရှော့ချဖို့ရန်အတွက်နဲ့တစ်တော်များကိုကာကွယ်နိုင်ရေးတိုးမြင့်ရန်ရည်ရွယ်ချက်ထားပြီးလှုပ်ဆောင်ရင်းနဲ့အတူချမှတ်ပြဋ္ဌာန်းထားတဲ့စီမင်းအသစ်များနဲ့အညီလိုက်ပါဆောင်ရွက်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်လယ်သမားများလိုအပ်တဲ့ပံ့ပိုးကူညီမှုများရနိုင်ဖို့ရန်တေချာစေခြင်းနဲ့စိမ့်လန်းတဲ့အသွင်ကူးပြောင်းမှုမှာ၎င်းတို့အတွက်ကောင်းမွန်တဲ့အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းမှုများရရှိနိုင်မှုဟာလည်းအရေးကြီးလာပါတယ်
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Professor Markku Kaaninen to take the floor.
Thank you, Tina. Let me just share my presentation first. I hope you can see it. Yes, first of all, good morning, everyone, and many thanks for the organizers for inviting me to have the opportunity to speak here. I think the reason why I have been invited is that I have about 30 years of experience working with the IPCC, climate change, and the land use in the tropics. And maybe the other one that I have, I was participating as a technical expert helping the EU Commission when they were outlining the policies that is related to deforestation and the role of EU consumption on it. So I'll try to be short in my presentation. I don't want to go into these details. Everybody knows what we are talking about. I think that Tina, who we already emphasized in her presentation in the beginning, that the deforestation is influencing not only the forest as such and the productivity, but the biodiversity, because what we are losing is mainly the old growth natural forest with high biodiversity. And then we have also large greenhouse gas emissions related to those things. So I think that this is something that we already know. I think that what is I want to emphasize here in this context is that basically the results of the IPCC 2019 land report and the work related to that is that the whole land use sector, including food production, is a major source of CO2 emissions, or let's say greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. So what about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the land use and food value chain? And I think that this is something that we have to think about and it's a main concern. And of these food production emissions, about 60% is related to animal-based food. So I think that we have to discuss these issues today. If we think about what we see inside the kind of the changes in the agriculture, forest and land use sector, in the AFLU sector, is that if you look at let's say since 1990, the agriculture emissions have been increasing practically in all the places around the world, whereas the emissions related to land use, including deforestation, have been not increasing, or they have been increasing less. So we have been seeing a change where we have some positive developments in the AFLU sector, but the agriculture emissions are going up. So that is one kind of a general thing. The other one if we are looking at this kind of the whole, let's say, national efforts in different countries related to those, the importance of agriculture sector and food production is increasing in terms of emissions, whereas the industrial and transport emissions have been declining in many countries due to carbon trading and all the other measures that have been taken. So the land use and food production sectors are becoming a kind of a emission hotspot in the future. And the issue that has to be mentioned in this context, and it's related to the development issues, and is the serious land degradation, which is a problem which is already exceeding planetary boundaries. We are talking about 40% of the global land area and 3 billion people who are influenced by this land degradation, which is influencing directly the land agriculture productivity and food security in most countries. And this situation is not coming better with the climate change. It's getting worse with the climate change. In this IPCC report of 2019, they were basically outlining how the land sector emissions could be aligned with the 1.5 development scenarios that are here below. This is coming from the IPCC 2018 1.5 degree report. So I don't want to go into details, but basically what I want to show you that if we have a current level of about 1 billion hectares of land use change going on, we have to get down to about half of that, about 400 million hectares of land use change by 2050. If we want to get in any of those scenarios that have been outlined for reaching the 1.5 degree targets. And if you go into this, looking at this kind of a details, I just want to highlight two things. I mean, the pastures that are this kind of a yellow, the light green bars in the bottom, there has to be a significant decrease in the pasture area and increased productivity in agriculture productivity if we want to reach those targets in terms of land use sector. And of course, we have some good examples of that. If you think about the situation in Amazonia, in Brazil, between 2004 and 2014, Brazilian government was able to cut down the deforestation in the Amazonia about 70%, 70, which is an incredible amount of areas that have been saved. And one of the main reasons for that is related to the two main commodities that are operating in that area. This is soy production and the beef production, cattle ranching. In both of these, during the same period, the beef production has been increasing and the soy production has been increasing. And at the same time, we have a reduction of 70% in tropical deforestation. So the Brazilians have been able to do what we would expect that should be a kind of a normal case in many parts of the world, is to disconnecting the agricultural production from land use change and deforestation. That means increasing the productivity per unit area in terms of both agriculture and in cattle ranching. And also introducing value chain certifications for the producers of soy in order to get into the more sustainable land use practices. So we have good examples that we can learn from when we try to get into those targets. Of course, an important thing is that nowadays we have a very large international commodity chains and value chains, global markets of commodities and raw materials, which are basically then influencing also the CO2 balance. And so we have this kind of embodied CO2 emissions in the products that we produce in different parts of the world, and then they are consumed in the other parts of the world. And I think that this is something that we have to think about if we want to develop strategies and policies for equitable transition to climate resilient development. For instance, this is from the IPCC report, which is still in the preparation, which is showing the emissions for countries that are calculated with two ways. I mean, I have been outlining this in the box. I mean, sorry, in this one box, if we have a consumption-based emissions, we are looking at the solid line, and if we are looking at the production-based emissions, we are looking at this dotted line. So we see, for instance, in the developed countries here in the top, the consumption-based emissions are above the production-based emissions. It means that these countries are importing products which they are consuming in those countries, but the production has happened in China or somewhere else, and the emissions are happening in those in countries like China. And here, the other one, the red one, is we see the same kind of a development, but the one in the other way around, we have the dotted line above the solid line, which means that these countries are exporting products that where the production has happened though in that country. So we see that there is a net emission transfer and basically leakage among we are basically outsourcing our emissions of our consumption here in the West or in the developed world. We are outsourcing those emissions into developing countries and countries in the development pathways. And then there is one kind of an example that we can think about in the concrete terms, which are the emission sources for deforestation related emissions in different commodities, which are here marked with colors, and in different regions, which are here in this kind of the columns of the graph. We have Brazil, rest of Latin America, Indonesia, Asia Pacific, and Africa. So for instance, we see here in the case of Brazil, about 75% of the Brazilian land use based and deforestation based emissions are coming from this pink box, which is cattle meat. So cattle meat is the main driver of the Brazilian land-based emissions. If you look at the Indonesian case, the biggest share, about 50% of the total, is coming from the palm oil or oil palm cultivation. So we see this kind of differences between the countries, but we also see with those numbers that are here is that their share of those emissions of the total land deforestation related carbon dioxide emissions in different countries, which are totaling here about 2.60 gigatons of CO2 per year, which we can say that it's a little bit less than the total emissions of EU, which are about 4 gigatons. So for instance, this Brazilian 21% here means that 21% of global deforestation related emissions are coming from cattle ranching in Brazil. Or 10% here is saying that 10% of the global deforestation related emissions are coming from the oil palm production in Indonesia. So I think that this is a very nice analysis. It gives us understanding on these processes that are going on in different parts of the world and different drivers that are influencing those processes. Then, of course, the scientists have been calculating what has been the share of exports of those. So it is showing that, for instance, in the case of Brazil, we see total emissions here in this colored kind of bars between 2010 and 2014. And the role of export are these black lines here with two models. So in case of Brazil, I would say maybe 15–20% of the emissions or the productions have been exported. In some other parts, like in Indonesia, it's about 50% is included in the exports. So we understand a little bit more the connections between the land use change and deforestation related emission processes in those countries and the export and in the global market. And then we can see this kind of models where we have two models here representing the same situation where the emissions are exported from Latin America. For instance, here you see the importance of the domestic consumption, and then the role of EU is here. The emissions, the products coming with these value chains and commodity chains. So there are different ways that we have been people have been calculating these, and we have more understanding of what's going on and how this global trade is influencing those emission pathways. And this is an example of the EU. So when EU was basically preparing for the policies that are now under discussion related to deforestation and products consumed in EU, this analysis was made where they show that about 10% of the tropical deforestation is related to EU consumption. And this in terms of hectares, we are talking about 190,000 hectares per year is related to EU consumption-based emissions that are happening in the third countries. The emissions related to those deforestation rates is about 100 million CO2 tons per year, which is equals to 2 times of emissions of Finland. We see here on the right the kind of the role of different commodities. We see that the soy has been very important about 15 years ago, and it's been declining, whereas palm oil has been increasing its importance, and same with the other commodities. This has then led to an idea that EU can do something in terms of looking at the role of EU consumption and tropical deforestation. There is a past experience with the EU timber regulation and related FLEGT mechanism, which is basically was looking at the illegally harvested timber and illegally produced products, and they're importing them to EU, and that regulation has been there since 2013, and then EU seemingly wanted to kind of follow the same kind of a pathway of trying to develop mechanisms where the trade-related emissions could be reduced in EU. And I'm not going into details because I know that the next presentation will be about this. But in 2019, EU launched this communication where they basically were saying that there are 5 priority actions that EU wants to do in order to look at the role of EU consumption in the tropical deforestation. It is basically aiming at deforestation-free supply chains, trying to kind of deforest-proof the EU development cooperation, trying to strengthen international cooperation to halt deforestation, and importantly, redirect finance in terms of more sustainable land use practices, and then the whole issue of getting more information and supporting research and innovation on these topics is one of the actions. And what they might be, of course, this process is underway, and the next presentation most likely will share more information about what's going on with the current EU preparations, but the idea is that they may include mandatory due diligence rules. The EU document is talking about 6 commodities: soy, beef, palm oil, wood, and cocoa and coffee, which might be the ones they want to tackle in this first phase. So there's due diligence rules for operators, traceability of the products so that the people know where they have been produced, some kind of a benchmarking system, for instance, that the countries could be classified with low, normal, and high-risk countries, and then they would be different kind of procedures applied to a country X, depending on whether this country belongs to low risk or high risk category. And then the last is, of course, all the kind of working with those partnering countries, governments, private sector, civil society, to add deforestation in those countries. Most likely something similar, which is or similar to the FLEGT, or if it's different, then related to the Green Deal and the EU development cooperation related to these topics. I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Markku. They were great numbers in the presentation. If there is a very concise question at this stage, I could allow 1 or 2. You can raise your hand, but if there are none, I would then ask Maya to take the floor.
Thank you, Tiina, and thank you, Markku, for your presentation. Okay, I guess you see the presentation now. So I will take you to this kind of like overall picture of the impacts of EU and Finnish consumption, tropical deforestation, some aspects regarding biodiversity as well, and then some also recommendations from WWF, what we think that is important to tackle the deforestation challenge. And some of the issues are similar what Markku just presented. So I try to keep it short. And so I work in WWF Finland. I'm a forest and development officer. I have a background in tropical forest ecology and also development and social sciences. So that's my background. And lately I've been working quite a lot with these deforestation topics. Okay, so here a little bit of a global aspect on the deforestation fronts. Most of you know these deforestation hotspots, but here in the red you can see where the deforestation is focused. Of course, there's deforestation elsewhere as well, but these, according to a study that WWF did about a year ago, a global
Maija.
study. Yes.
Sorry, we see only the first slide at the moment.
Oh, really? Oh, sorry. Okay, let's see. If it's so, I tried to I did update this.
But it's not in the presentation mode.
Yes, I was seeing it as a presentation mode. Let's try once again. If not, then I'll just keep it as a separate. So, do you see it as a presentation mode now? No. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so let's do it so that I keep it like this, because then it should be visible. Is it okay for you?
Yes, but now we see the first slide.
Yes, first slide is now, and if I change, do you see the second one?
Yes, now it's good.
Okay, super. Yes, there was a time here in between that it worked, but now it's back again. There's sometimes this Zoom is a bit challenging, but it's okay for me. So this is what I was explaining, that this is the map, and here in the red you can see the deforestation hotspots, and this is based on a study that WWF network, global network, did about a year ago. So it analyzed where are the areas where the deforestation is most rapid, and of course it happens also elsewhere, but these are the ones that there's most pressure at the moment based on the data from back about 13 years analysis. So like you know, in Latin America, in the Central Africa, West Africa, also in the East Africa to some extent, and then in the Southeast Asia are the hotspots. Also in Australia, which is basically only sort of a developed country which has a high deforestation. And Markku already introduced the drivers of deforestation. Here is one diagram of the agriculture-driven deforestation, and like it was mentioned already, the most important on a global scale is the cattle farming. But then these oil palm and soy production is also drivers that drive the sort of large-scale deforestation in oil palm in Southeast Asia, and then soy in the Latin America. But then there's also other commodities which were already presented also in Markku's presentation. But based on some analyses, agriculture is a very important driver. So between 2005 and 2017, it was estimated that 5 million hectares per year was deforested because of agriculture production. But I want to emphasize the drivers are not the same everywhere. So, for instance, in many African countries and deforestation fronts, there's the smallholder farming, the shifting cultivation, and other drivers that drive the deforestation and degradation and conversion, like it was mentioned also firewood collection or charcoal production. So if we want to tackle the drivers, we also need to understand that they are different and the dynamics are different. So there's not one solution that would then be perfect for every place. So now I will go into the analysis, and actually Marco already presented this EU share of the tropical deforestation. There was also a report done by the WWF EU Policy Office about a year ago, where they analyzed based on different data what is the share of EU consumption on the tropical deforestation, and we are the second after China, so it's quite important that we also do our share here in EU to prevent the deforestation. So in these from 2005 to 2017, EU import cost about 3.5 million hectares of deforestation. Of course, different studies might give a little bit different estimates, but what we know is that we also have a big responsibility here. And in this, you don't maybe see it perfectly, but when it was calculated that what are the commodities that we here in EU consume and which have the most important impacts on deforestation, the main ones were the soy and the palm oil and the beef, wood products, cocoa and coffee. And this is a bit complicated charts, but the yellow there indicates that it's coming from Brazil, and then the green one is from Indonesia, and so on. So you know that mostly soy and beef is coming from the Latin America, Brazil, and like Marco also pointed out, then palm oil from the Southeast Asia, and then cocoa from the West Africa, and coffee, then it's a mixture of Latin American countries, African countries, and then Southeast Asian countries. But on an EU level, it's important to remember that it's the soy that is still brought into EU from Brazil, although lately there's also increased imports from North America, from USA and from Canada. But that's also not a kind of guarantee for sustainability, because there's also challenges with the ecological sustainability of that production. Okay, so now I want to emphasize that it's really important to understand that this commodity production is not driving only deforestation in the tropical forests, but also in other forested landscapes. And specifically in Latin America, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Paraguay, Uruguay, there's really high biodiversity, forested grasslands and wetlands that are now suffering hugely of the commodity production, mainly soy and beef. So also linked to the EU law and EU regulation regarding the deforestation, it would be really important that the other forested landscapes would be included in that law. Otherwise, the destruction will continue in these landscapes, while then the tropical forest might be better conserved. And like Marco pointed out, there's good development with the Amazon forest, but then on the other hand, the Cerrado and other Pantanal landscapes are really suffering at the moment. And most of the soy, for instance, and the beef is actually coming from these landscapes. So here you can see a snapshot of the Latin America countries, mainly Brazil in this, and other countries as well. But on the right-hand side, you see those deforestation hotspots. So you can see that it's around the Amazonas, a little bit inside as well. But then there's vast areas outside. And these are those forested grassland, savannas, cerrado ecosystems. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the jaguar habitats. With the dark green, you can see the population, the main population habitats. And with the light green, you can see the corridors where they move from one habitat to another. And then with the dark red, you can see that there's important corridors that would need to be protected or restored in order to secure the habitat movement from the Amazonas to the Atlantic forest on the Atlantic coast. but unfortunately, these are very badly destructed due to the soy and beef production on the Cerrado landscape. So I just want to give you a glimpse of what it means from the sort of biodiversity conservation point of view, how we need to understand that it's important to include also other ecosystems in our efforts to tackle the deforestation. And also we need ecosystem restoration to bring back those natural or semi-natural habitats, even within those agricultural landscapes. Okay, now we'll go into the impacts of Finnish consumption. Last fall, we did an analysis with the help of Gaia Consulting here in Finland to analyze what is our role in this EU level consumption related to deforestation. And based on the data set that is in the basis of the EU level analysis as well, we got the deforestation risk for the Finnish consumption. It is from until 2017, but there was also analysis to the previous years to see whether the imports are same or if they have changed. But basically, we saw that coffee is a very important product here in our Finnish consumption related to deforestation risk. Then we have the soy, which in Finland is mostly used for poultry and pig feed. So it's important in the animal production sector as well. Then we have the wood products, cocoa and rubber, a little bit of sugar, beef and palm oil. And it's interesting that the palm oil doesn't come up very strongly. It used to be more important when going back to the data about 10 or 15 years ago. But now, based on this analysis, these are the main products and their shares. Palm oil is also a little bit different because when they analyzed the data, it seemed that it's not, there was some challenges to get the transparent data of the imports to Finland, for instance. So this is just an estimation of the risk. So it's not, you cannot rely 100% on this data. But there's a lot of data sets behind these analyses. So there's the Pentrill data set, there's FASTA, Trace, Customs, and then Global Forest Watch. So it's kind of like a mixture of these. So where do those products to Finland mostly come from? So this is partly in Finnish, but mainly like in the EU level as well. The soy and the beef comes from Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. Then the cocoa comes from West Africa, Central Africa to some extent. And then the rubber, palm oil, and some wood products come from the Southeast Asia, Indonesia mostly. A little bit of beef comes from Australia. And then the sugarcane comes from the Central America. And these, of course, can change. So it's not something that it's always, this will be the situation always. But at the based on this analysis, these were the main places where that came from. Now I would like to have a little bit of glimpse to the another analysis that was done last year on the commitments of private sector related to deforestation. So have those commitments worked that have been done in the previous years? For instance, the New York Declaration Forest, the previous Glasgow Leaders Pledge on Forest. Okay, that was quite recent. So there's no evidence about that yet, but anyways, there's several pledges. The analysis shows that these commitments have not really worked that well as we have hoped for. So they have not met the targets and the deforestation conversion continues. So there was one analysis that analyzed 865 companies and another one 350 companies. And out of those, only about half had commitments related to deforestation. So these are global companies that have something to do with those high-risk commodities that were mentioned. So only about half had commitments, and out of those, only about 40 or 46% actually report on any kind of progress about against those commitments. So not very strong. Here you can see that relates to those commodities: beef, palm oil, soy, timber, pulp and paper. There's the global production volume on the first row, and then there's those shares that they have that has been committed to be deforestation free. So it's not very strong here either. It's less than 30%, less than 20%, and even with the soy or timber, even less. So I will not go into details, but there's still a lot to do with the private sector commitments and those that they would actually implement those. And also with the finance sector, less than 10% have deforestation or conversion-free commitments. So we really need to also push for the finance sector to really stop funding deforestation and conversion. Okay, then some short recommendation from our side. So we think that both regulation and laws are needed, but also voluntary actions are needed. So the EU deforestation law, UK law, and US laws are on the way at the moment, but also we need continuous voluntary actions from the private sector. Also, it would be really welcome to have laws and voluntary actions from the producer countries themselves. We need leadership. We need sector and cross-sectoral coalitions from private sectors to drive the deforestation conversion free to be the business as usual. We need the green supply chains on different levels. We want private sector to assess their risk for deforestation. We want them to plan and execute their commitments and action plans, and we want them to be transparent and report on their progress publicly. And we want support to smallholder farmers in deforestation conversion-free production. We as WWF, we recommend the principles of the accountability framework, which is a system and has a lot of tools for deforestation-free implementation. And lastly, I want to point out that the production of these high-risk commodities and maybe also new commodities will increase in the future and expand to new areas. I want to also emphasize, which will be discussed later, that this is in the hands of millions of smallholder farmers who really depend on the production of these commodities as their livelihood. So human rights needs to be also in the center of sustainable value chains. And many of these products, they do have a sustainable farming systems. They can be produced through agroforestry, restoration agriculture, and so on. And the traditional farming methods usually are quite sustainable. Also, other impacts like climate change and water impacts should be analyzed. And as a reminder to all of us that reduction of wasteful and overconsumption also here in Finland is a must. So we need to change our way of consuming things. Thank you very much. And sorry for this layout challenge.
No problem. Thank you, Maya, very much.
Okay, I tried to stop my sharing.
Yes. I know that in the chat, Soile Käkkönen has indicated that now the soy use in Finland comes mainly from North America nowadays, but there might be some other big companies using the soy from Brazil.
Yeah.
This is a very complex phenomenon. There are many drivers. There are very many differences in different parts. I wonder if there are any short questions to Maya, or shall we continue with the panel? There is Marco, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. It's not a question, it's just a kind of a comment related to the statistics. I mean, when you do the analysis of deforestation related to certain products, I mean, I think that we still have a lot to do with the statistics. For instance, when we have been looking at this situation in Europe, in many cases, the port of entry to Europe is marked as a destination. So in many cases, Rotterdam or Netherlands will basically seem to be the destination of a product, and actually it is not. It's just the port of entry. So I think that when we are trying to get into this kind of a tracking, which EU seems to be wanting, then we need to have a very good tracking system, not only in those countries where they are being produced, but also in the EU. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. Maybe I could now ask the panelists to put their cameras on, and we could start with the panel. I would first like you to introduce yourself and then also explain what is your take into this topic. What are the measures of controlling deforestation that you're dealing with? And for example, what is the commodity you most know about? Maybe I start with Anne. Could you please take the floor?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dina, and thank you for FFD for inviting me to this panel. A great pleasure to be in this all-female panel. I think my first one. So yes, I come from Finnfund, which is a Finnish Development Financing Institute, and we are financing companies operating in developing countries, and our focus at the moment, and according to our strategy, is heavily in Africa. So more than 50% of our new investments actually are made in African companies. And out of our 5 strategic sectors, 2 are actually related closely to land use, because they are agriculture and forestry. And the companies we are financing, they operate in the whole value chain in agriculture, from production to trading and processing. And often those companies, they actually also, they may be producing some of the commodities themselves, but they often operate with smaller producers as well, and rely on the smallholder value chains quite heavily. And then from product side, I would say that, yes, we have also some of those problematic commodities in our companies, including palm oil, for example, but then there are also, in a smaller extent, there are coffee and cocoa producers or traders, mainly in our companies financing, and then many other commodities in all, I would say, in all continents, but the smallholder side is, I would say, mainly in Africa. So that's how I represent myself here in this panel. Thank you. Tina, you're muted.
Thank you, Anne. And then maybe going on the alphabetical order based on the first name, I would like to ask Elizabeth to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Tina, and thank you to the organizers for inviting farmers to be part of these discussions, which are very dear to us as smallholder farmers. So my name is Elizabeth Nsimadala. I'm a smallholder farmer and the president of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, which is a regional umbrella of national level farmers organizations in the 10 Eastern Africa countries, with a representation of over 20 million smallholder farmers. And our farmers are involved in crop, in livestock, fisheries, and forestry value chains, mainly looking at or engaging in wood forestry, in fruits, and coffee, and other enterprises, including cocoa. So for us, as smallholder farmers, when we speak of deforestation, we look at an activity of conversion of forests to other land uses. For our case, mainly for crop farming, for animal pastures, water reservoirs, among others. But when you look at other sectors, of course, which closely work with us, it also includes things to do with urban development, but also infrastructure development. And we all know that, of course, deforestation has huge impacts at different levels. Studies show that 1/5 of the global greenhouse gas emissions and other impacts to the environment, including the biodiversity loss, the soil erosion, the desertification, as a result of deforestation, as has been highlighted by the previous speakers. So in terms of the measures to control deforestation, from our end, we see it as more inclined towards creating awareness on its negative impact to the landscape and other land use users. For example, in terms of reducing the water quality, the water quantity, hence impacting on agriculture productivity, and of course, other downstream value chain actors. So for the smallholder farmers, we need to really understand the long-term impacts of deforestation and make sure that we are part and parcel of the solutions. And also, we've been and we need to adopt agroforestry, afforestation, reforestation, and sustainable management of existing conservation initiatives, but also the alternative sources of, for example, firewood to reduce the pressure on the natural forests. We have been doing this, but we still believe that a lot more needs to be done if we are to achieve zero deforestation. Thank you, and over to Tina.
Thank you. Could I then ask Julia to present herself and the linkages to the topic?
Thank you very much, Tina, and for the invitation to discuss this very current and important topic for us. So my name is Lea Rankinen, and I'm working as a director of sustainability and public affairs here at Paulik. And a few words about the company I'm representing. Myself, I've been working over 20 years with the sustainability topics in global value chains and developing the tools there. But Paulik is a 145 years old family-owned value-driven company, and when we look at this topic especially, it's kind of that related to our extensive global value chain. We are operating, we are food and beverage company. At the same time, our ambition is to be the front runner in the area of sustainability. As the owners of the family owners want to also drive this long-term business here, and if you think about the value chain and our portfolio, kind of a current status, we're market leader in Tex-Mex. We are very well known in the coffee area here in Finland, one of the most sustainable roasteries in the world. We are sourcing spices from 100 different countries. So the global value chain is extensive. Nearly 1,000 different raw materials we are buying from around 600 different suppliers. But specifically when we are talking about the deforestation and the main linkages to that, then from our categories, it's really much linked to the coffee, also as in palm oil and soya are the ingredients in the food products, but then also the fiber-based packaging materials sourcing. And so these are the key raw materials we identified already earlier, but which are also part of the new EU legislative initiative actually. So we are not starting from the zero. We've been working with this topic, with these raw materials already years, and so based on that, I can also elaborate later on what kind of measures we have done and what are the learnings from those for the future, and the kind of implications also for the EU level, some wishes and thoughts.
Thank you, Lea. And let's take Julia then.
Thanks very much. So my name is Julia Wakeling-Bird. I work for Silver Street Capital. We are an impact investor into the African agricultural space. We manage 2 funds investing in African agriculture, and we invest in businesses primarily to fix value chains. Our work in controlling deforestation is through working with smallholder farmers who make up the majority of production in Africa. We focus on improving smallholder farmer productivity, and we do this through providing improved seed products, providing training in best farming practices, and providing markets for high-value rotation crops. One of the products we work with is soybeans. We work with this in a very positive way. They are an incredibly valuable rotation crop. They are a legume, they fix nitrogen, many smallholder farmers monocrop maize, for example, and adding in soybeans as a rotation crop is incredibly valuable. It's one of the fundamentals of conservation agriculture. And so it's a very valuable product for us. In Africa, our challenge is to increase productivity on existing land. We need to meet the food demand of the growing population. Population is about 1 billion now, growing to 2 billion by 2050. So we have to increase productivity in existing land. The yields are low, so maize or corn yields are about 1.5 tons per hectare in sub-Saharan Africa versus a global average of 6 tons per hectare. There's a paper by Williams et al. In 2021. They showed that raising yields is the single most effective intervention that can be used to reduce deforestation. For this to be successful, we need to increase productivity and earnings. So there is a direct link between livelihoods and deforestation. It's an interesting social environmental link where we have to solve the social problem in order to solve the environmental problem. And so actually deforestation is a social issue. So smallholder, as I said, smallholder farmer production is primarily of low value subsistence crops that are produced mainly for local markets. So interestingly, in the areas in Southern and East Africa where we work, most of the deforestation is for internal use rather than the deforestation is not exported, for example. And smallholder farmers tend not to produce high value export crops, but increasing access to these markets certainly would be beneficial. Just a couple of figures. So one of our challenges is measuring the impact of our work. So we are currently producing seed, like this is high yielding seed for over 300,000 smallholder farmers. We know that using hybrid seed and conservation agricultural methods can double yields. And with this, we estimate that over 260,000 hectares of land is saved from being cleared because of the seed that we produce. But climate variability is certainly making productivity by smallholder farmers more difficult. And so this just even further increases the importance of the right inputs and conservation agricultural methods and the markets for the right products for smallholder farmers. Thanks.
Good. Thank you, Julia. And it was interesting when you kind of shifted the focus on introducing export and high value crops to reduce the deforestation. But what I think is very important that you mentioned that it is a lot the social issue and it is an issue related to poverty. The measuring challenge was also mentioned. The previous speakers didn't really explore on the challenges. So I was wondering, Anne, could you explore what do you see as the key challenges on reducing deforestation?
Well, from our perspective, I would say that often it's actually a matter of reach, in that sense that where we as a financial have our leverage is at the company level. And we are actually operating according to the IFC performance standards framework, which regulates very strictly conversion of land. And that we can put as a requirement for the companies we finance, but we don't have reach. We don't have such leverage in the value chains. And often these companies, yes, they may have extension programs, they may have support programs, like Julia just said, the way of working the companies have in their funds, but then it's limited in a way that it's very much the carrot you have, not so much the stick you can put on the smallholders, and how to first of all introduce the new ways of operating, and then making that transparent to measure the impact, like Julia said, to demonstrate that what's being done, what has reached at the smallholder level. That's definitely a challenge. And well, I would say that Julia very much summarized it all in her introduction in a way that it's also the matter of financial feasibility for the smallholder. That once it makes economically sense, then you do it. But if you need to compete with others who have different rules compared to those we are applying to them, and those rules are more flexible, give you better benefits in short term. For example, the national subsidy system may be such that it actually supports the old school way of working and does not make it easy to transfer to new regenerative farming systems, for example. Well, then you won't do it. So I would say that it's about first of all your capacities to actually, well, to put it bluntly, dictate the rules of the game. They are limited. There are the players having different rules. So how do those match? How the competition is between those different ways of operation, and then measuring it. What's the difference? Because it's not only about how we do it, how we want to demonstrate that we do it better, but it's also to demonstrate for the farmers that actually, if you take a little bit longer perspective, it makes more sense. Because often it requires the demonstration effect as well, so that the others will follow with the new methods. So I think those are the challenges from our perspective.
It's interesting that you lifted up very strongly this need for systemic change, that there are still a lot of powers and drivers that push farmers to go to the other side. And I think this was also discussed in the Food System Summit last year, but this only underlies that it's not only, I think there are carrot and sticks that need to be used, but then also to have this enabling environment. I wonder, Elizabeth, since you're dealing with smallholders and you are a smallholder yourself, producer, how do you see that? What are the key challenges, for example, for your constituency for not adopting kind of a forestry favorable production systems?
Yeah, thank you, Tina. And I want to really approach it at the organizational level. For smallholder initiatives to have a greater impact based on the experience we have on the ground, and given the diversity of the smallholder farmers, there is really need to have these smallholders organized into groups. There could be farmers associations and cooperatives, so that, you know, initiatives can target a wider constituency. But when you look at most of these farm associations and cooperatives, much as they exist, their functionality is usually experienced with challenges due to institutional capacity, the capacity of the organizations themselves to be able to offer, you know, such services to their membership, but also in terms of resource constraints. So there is need to increase resources to support these producer organizations. We know that, for example, deforestation is a day-to-day activity. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of sensitization, in terms of awareness creations, and this should be a core activity of the producer organizations. So resources have to be put in place to make sure that such initiatives are implemented. In most countries in Africa, over 80%, for example, forest businesses are small and run locally, and these form more than 50% of the total forests. But these measures, when you look at them, they tend to work where there is, of course, increased smallholder farmers' involvement in the different initiatives, especially talk of the landowners, because these smallholder farmers are majority landowners, but also the land users and the managers, people who are supporting implementation of these initiatives on the farm. But the challenge is that usually there are also no incentives that are, you know, that are available. But also when it comes to the alternatives, they're usually very expensive. For example, if you're telling a smallholder farmer not to use firewood as a source of energy, what other alternatives do they have on the table? And are these alternatives affordable? Are they accessible by the smallholder farmers? There's also a need, I think, to bring into this discussion the non-wood forest products, which are, derived from forests. For example, when we talk of fruits, like the berries, the edible nuts, among others, we need to also look at some of these products so as to diversify the enterprises and diversify at the same time the sources of incomes to the smallholder farmers as an alternative to reduce on deforestation. Thank you, and over.
Thank you. Interesting, and interesting that you emphasizes the incentives and really the earnings that farmers need to have, and the possibilities for alternatives as regarding wood fuel. It is interesting that the use of charcoal and wood as fuel has decreased in all the other continents, but it's still increasing in Africa. So it is a kind of a crucial issue there. I was wondering, Leah, how do you see, from point of view of a company dealing with this value change, what do you feel are the key challenges you are facing in order to, encourage your suppliers to tackle the deforestation?
Thank you very much, and maybe I quickly start with the kind of existing ways of doing the measures and trying to tackle the topic. And we have a lot of different actions into the toolbox, basically, and the kind of a level how far we can go varies a little bit different with the different raw materials. But I think that one of the key elements is that we recognize the key raw materials. Then we also have the good traceability for the origin countries, that the level of risks also there, increasing the traceability. In a coffee area specifically, we've been working for years to increase the we have a traceability to the farmer group level already, to be using the verification and certification systems. So that is then one of the key tool to element. But then industry collaboration, we are doing a lot on that, and then trying to tackle specifically those issues which Anne was also raising earlier, that increasing the capacity and there, and because many of the farmers and in these countries, the communities, there are also other players too, basically. And if you are doing that alone, so when shifting the new concept or new way of working, it's really good to find those platforms also where you can drive the change at the industry level also. So that we have found out is a really key area there. But the verification, certification systems are really important. Then we come up with the challenges area also, that with the different raw materials, there might be a little bit different criteria and expectations or way of working, and that they are not always developing into the same timelines, basically. So that's the area that in the future, probably, if we want to also tackle it more deeply, we need more dynamic models also, that we can faster develop also the criterias and verifications into the certification systems. That's important, because we see that as a really important tool into the due diligence also in the future. It is scalable in the different actions. But then challenges is that really we have a lot of country level data which we can use to do the risk assessments, but we need more accurate, up-to-date data in the future if we really want to go further. That we can't just have 3 years or 5 years old data based on the country levels. We need more accurate data to be able to combine really your own existing supply chains, that you can say that, but okay, definitely the more accurate risk level, that is this linked to the certain area, what the data is also showing. That's really one of the keys. So more dynamic systems, more accurate data intelligence for crossing with the different players, definitely needed. And then one of the challenge is that if I coming back to the first presentation also that the EU market is driving 10% of the global deforestation. And where our supply chains also goes, that then it's a challenge that global versus local demand and markets. That if you need to pull out something to be able to bring in and also make sure the deforestation, what kind of impact it has locally. So that's always that are the local government actions going to the same direction where the EU is. So for the company own supply chain level, we also need this upper level where the influencers do, and that's why we really much flag about this forest partnership with the EU and country levels, because at the end of the day, it's coming back to then that the challenge at the farm levels is that of course that if the locally legislation is not high enough or something and the markets are increasing, why do the changes either then from some of the supply chains? So and then that if there are other players who are not working with the similar standards, then it's more challenges those who are driving the change in the front runner position. So collaboration and these country level initiatives are really much appreciated.
Thank you, Leon. Interesting. I have been also pondering the balance between the kind of heavy control of verified EU production versus these domestic processes, which might pull the farmers to the other way. I think that that is something that needs to be pondered. There's also a comment here from Samuel Tumwasige, who says that the charcoal is a driver of deforestation in East Africa, and there is a lot of demand at the urban poor households where this seems to be the one of the few alternatives for domestic fuel. But it was interesting, you have been mentioning the verification and data, and this was also what Julia was hinting as a challenge. And I would like to hear a little bit more on how you, Julia, have been tackling this in your business, and what do you see as future steps, and what is your feeling? Are the governments really starting to create an environment so that it wouldn't be only you and your business, but more the government, advisory services, subsidies, etc., supporting the same direction? Please, Julia.
Yes, so just in terms of verification and data collection, so we use multiple different avenues. So we do our own surveys. So we do surveys with smallholder farmers within our portfolio, either ourselves or through third-party organizations. We also have partners who do surveys, and then we get the results of those surveys. So the online data, I mean, the surveys, the on-the-ground data is incredibly valuable, but we can't possibly gather the data for enough smallholder farmers to make a very broad statement. And so we use academic research to verify our results. And so, for example, we've analyzed studies of over 10,000 smallholder farmers using improved seed, for example, because it's much more robust data than just a couple of surveys involving some hundreds of smallholder farmers. So we do like to use academic research. In the future, we see more use of like satellite imagery and AI to see where there are land use changes going on. And we think that can be a very useful broad tool. We haven't started using that yet, but we think that that's definitely coming and will be more on the cusp. I think that we will have to drive this ourselves rather than it being driven at a government level. And I think that, yeah, I think that that's work that we'll have to do.
Okay, good. Thank you. Elizabeth, could I turn to you and hear from you? How do you see that the governments in Eastern Africa are being supportive with this kind of activities, and what would you ask as a step forward from them? What is a message that you would like to ask and say to your governments? Now you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so looking at what is happening in East Africa, and of course, starting off with a comment that was raised by my colleague on the increased charcoal usage in the region that has led to deforestation. There are a number of initiatives that are being put in place by our government to curb down deforestation, especially when it comes to charcoal, the usage of charcoal. But still, much as we have the policies, the implementation is still lacking. And this is where I think I highly recommend that there is need for all the actors to be at the same level of information. And this would bring in the farmers, the forest keepers, or the leaders, at different levels, including the policymakers and other value chain actors. All these people, it is an ecosystem that need to be part of the process. Much as you can have the measures in place, but as long as the actors don't understand the implication and the impact of deforestation, then a lot cannot be achieved. So we need to understand, each actor needs to understand their different roles, their different tasks in terms of implementation, and the process should be participatory in nature, not government coming up with just policies from nowhere, but every actor needs to be involved in all these processes. Lately, I've seen, of course, involvement of other, for example, energy sources where government initiatives are supporting, for example, the use of the manufacture and use of briquettes from waste to substitute, for example, the use of charcoal. This is where we need a lot of awareness creation, to be able to turn, for example, this waste that could as well have a disadvantage in terms of, for example, blocking our water sources, but can be put to another use as, as a substitute for charcoal. But also, we've also seen other innovations like the use of, for example, the volcanic rocks. We have volcanic mountains in the southern, southwestern part of the country. And these rocks, for example, have been a hindrance to agriculture sector, especially, for example, Uganda, where I come from. But we've seen recent initiatives where these volcanic rocks can be used for cooking, with solar technology. And these are initiatives that are partly being promoted by government. So if all actors can have the right information and be brought on board, I think some of these alternatives can be able to reduce deforestation. Over.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And I noticed that there's a question or remark in the chat, really like requesting how to raise producers' awareness around deforestation and related policies in, for example, in Africa. Do you see that there is enough awareness among the farmers, or is there still need to do something more? This is for you still, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think I've already mentioned that we are already doing a lot in terms of, for example, afforestation, reforestation, and other initiatives. But it's not enough. It's not enough because deforestation happens each and every day. So we need to have more of awareness creation. We have to have more, actors on board so that, because when climate change effects are experienced, they have no borders. Everyone is affected. So it doesn't have to be a producer's only initiative. It has to be, we have to use a holistic approach where everyone feels that they are responsible for the effects of deforestation. There has to be a reporting mechanism, for example. If deforestation is happening, is prohibited by government, and you see you see it happening, for example, in your rural communities, is there a reporting mechanism where this information can reach let's say the policymakers or the team that is responsible, so that some of these, for example, individuals can be held accountable? We've also seen cases where, for example, the so-called big guys in the government, the untouchables, are being involved in deforestation, for example, of our natural forests. So is there a mechanism where some of these so-called big shots can be held accountable? I think that is what is really lacking. But in terms of the policies, we have policies are available, but they don't bite. So we need to have that strong biting component within our policies. And yes, as producer organizations, I always say that for us, we are always ready. We stand ready to be part and parcel of every initiative. And we welcome everyone who is ready to walk this journey with us, because we are the mostly affected by this impact of deforestation. Thank you.
Thank you. And talking about the regulation, let's go back to the EU regulation. I would like to now ask from you, like, what do you see as advantages and, on the other hand, challenges as per the new proposal for the zero deforestation value chain regulation? Maybe Anne, you could share your views on this.
Well, I would say that definitely the benefit is that now it becomes everybody's responsibility. We've seen that the voluntary certification schemes, for example, they are not enough, and that the market has not been aware enough of the issue. So in that sense, I would very much welcome the initiative. The challenges then, of course, are that to what extent the consumers accept the price increase. That is quite inevitable, because there are costs associated to the traceability of the products, and especially when we look at the value chains where there are actors like smallholders, the costs will increase definitely. So that's one question. And then we've already touched the point that there are different markets. The same awareness is not present everywhere. So the risk is that we will see similar kind of leakage we've seen in terms of previous attempts to curb deforestation, for example, in REDD+ projects, that how to prevent the leakage, that actually the deforestation will happen elsewhere and will then be associated to other value chains, not the EU ones. So I think those are the main challenges to be tackled. But that is then to be seen to what extent EU is willing to invest in supporting the national governments in transforming the system, the systemic level change, because there are many things to be done, beginning with the transformation of the subsidy systems. Maybe now with the global turbulence we are experiencing and the increasing oil prices, that may actually support our work in this, because traditional fertilizers, for example, may actually become too expensive they already are, of course, to some extent too expensive for many farmers, but even more so in the future with increasing oil prices and fossil fuel prices. So we'll see, but definitely it's not only in the hands of the markets. It needs also the traditional type of policy level cooperation, and also grant financing to the countries so that they will actually work on the systemic change.
Thank you. Leah, how do you see from Paulik's point of view the new regulatory framework proposed? Do you see as a benefit, and do you see that there are any pitfalls? You already mentioned that they are kind of different players, the players who will apply and comply with the rules, and then the rest. But do you see that this is taking a step to the right direction?
Thank you. Yeah, and yes, for sure. Overall, it's really much in that we share the objective and the goal of this initiative to protect the world forest. That's kind of a level what we need. And coming back to the previous, that it will increase the awareness among all the players and topics. So we have been advocating for it for a year, like saying that yes, we promote and for the objective to save the world forest, and welcomed really much the EU initiative supporting it overall, because we see that this is kind of putting the bar in the same level for everybody. Increasing the level playing field is important. That if you also want to proceed to the next level in your own activities and your own supply chain, it is easier when you get among the much more companies also playing, and also everybody, different players in the society, to achieving the same. So, but at the same time, we've been saying that part of that initiative, it's really important to understand that there need to be a smart mix of measures and different kind of tools in the box. That with the legislation we will go somewhere, but the kind of voluntary actions are needed, and step-by-step approach is also important to understand that the going from somewhere to somewhere else, it doesn't happen in the one night. And even though we are not, and for us, I think that we are already starting, especially if we think about the traceability. We are among the, I think, with the top players have been building on those, but the requirement for the future is still very far. And even though we know that our actions are how we can do it today, it's not feasible. What is the expectation in the initiative? So that gap we need to kind of build on very smartly together, that we are not losing smallholder farmers either on that way, because then nobody is winning in that scenario. So that we are able to move there together, basically. And if talking about the challenges, one of the key, which was touched already is the very specific and high level expectation for the traceability, geological coordinates to the plot of land. So a kind of that is specifically the area where we need to think about the ways to go there, what kind of a support is needed from the technical point of view, from the management system point of view, to handle that data, and with the kind of expenses also, and who is owning the data, and so on. So I think that if highlighting one of the area which is the challenge in the initiative, that is the one. Otherwise we can move forward, and that we need to clearly define together which is the good roadmap to go. But then other areas, minorities, with just a clear definitions, how we handle then how we define what is the agroforestry land, that which is not then the deforestation. So clear definitions in some areas. We also see that it's really important to still keep on that recognition for the third-party verification and certification as a due diligence measures, because that is those are the tools we can scale fastly and start to build on also the other activities based on those. So it's important to highlight that.
Interesting reflections. Thank you, Leah. Julia, I don't know how much you have been studying this regulatory proposal, and what is your feeling on it, and especially how much do you use certificates and these third-party verifications in your business, and what are the challenges there?
Thanks. So no, I'm not an expert on the EU regulations, but I do fully appreciate them. I think that they set a precedent for other markets to follow. As I said before, in Southern and East Africa, there's not a huge amount of the products are exported to the EU, so I don't think that that's going to be a major driver of change here. We do use certifications, so any products that are they're primarily consumer-driven certifications like Global Gap and things like that. One of the failures and one of the gaps in Global Gap is thinking more broadly about society and ecosystems. So, for example, Global Gap will test the quality of water that is being used to irrigate the crops, but not test the quality of water that is flowing off the property. So I think that there are gaps in all these certifications, and we have to be quite broad. If I can talk about the challenges from an EU regulatory perspective, so defining deforestation might be quite an interesting thing. So what is a forest? How dense does it have to be for it to be a forest? Is it how many trees per hectare, for example? If there's only like 1 tree per hectare, is that still something that should be considered? There is obviously in this forum and in this regulation, there's a very broad focus on forests. But perhaps this should be more inclusive of all biodiversity and value all indigenous ecosystems. In Africa, we have a lot of open ecosystems, so savannas and grasslands. Thank you to Maya for referencing the Cerrado in South America, which is similar to the savannas in Africa. There is incredible biodiversity in these systems, elephants, lions. Maya, you were talking about the jaguars in South America. So there's incredible biodiversity. There's also a lot of unrecognized carbon that is stored below ground in grasslands and savannas. And so I feel that indigenous ecosystems should be the focus. There's a lot of carbon capture and afforestation projects that are planting exotic trees. And there are negative consequences of this. For example, there's a paper, Bond et al. 2019, and so one of the negative consequences is loss of habitat for these savanna animals and ecosystems that we love dearly. But another example is water. So in the drought in Cape Town 4 years ago, the cheapest way to make more water is to cut down trees, specifically alien invasive trees in the catchments, in the mountain catchments, and that is something that is now being done. So I guess my point is that yes, there should be a focus on forests, but not all forests are equal, and there should be a focus on indigenous forests and not just on any trees. And actually, indigenous ecosystems should be a focus. Just a couple quick points. I think Leah referred to this, is the costs of adhering to, and the complications of adhering to any regulations. This can be exclusionary for smallholder farmers who might not have the abilities to do that. And linked to that is the need for a technical assistance facility or NGOs to support smallholder farmers to adhere to regulations. There's potential corruption in the certification process. The charcoal has been mentioned multiple times, and so this is a clash of increasing population versus biodiversity, where there's poor energy planning in certain areas, and the urban centers are definitely providing the greatest demand for charcoal, which is resulting in enormous deforestation in Southern Africa. There's unlikely to be as much of a switch to selling to markets that are not the EU, but I thought I'd put that down as well as a potential. Thanks.
Thank you. There was a reference to the definitions, what is forest, what is deforestation, etc. I wonder, Marco, if you are there online, if you could explore this topic, because you have been involved in the EU legislation development. I can see your picture there, but I'm not sure if you are still online.
Yes, I'm online. I'm saying that these definitional issues are super difficult. And for instance, in the document that EU has released, they have adopted the definition of deforestation, not including plantations. So for forests that in FAO definition include plantations, they are not included in the forest definition of this EU legislation. So I just only say that don't go into that area. I mean, definitions, you can end up there and you can spend your whole life in those and not having, so you have to find a kind of a practical solution where all the parties, or let's say stakeholders of this system, legislation system, agree on what they're going to use. And then it's defined, and then they are using those definitions. What is the right definition of forest? It's impossible to do.
Okay, so we don't go into definitions. We know that we have to do something, but maybe it's just as a last round with the panelists. If you would have to make this kind of a pitch speech for the decision making in the EU, what is the phrase that you would like to say to them? I don't know, Anna, would you like to start?
Maybe I will take one statement from the EU climate policies, the buzzword of just transition. I think that is the key, in a way that well, when you take the example from the climate world and the transformation from fossil system to the renewable system, so their efforts are made and finance is channeled to that just ways of doing that people who have to change their ways of living and livelihoods, they are somehow supported, compensated, so that the transformation is not painful for them. It's just. So the same needs to happen here, I would say. And
I think that, yes.
Then one topic, maybe I was only given one, but I'm taking two. So we've been focusing very much now to the forestry and to the agriculture, forest and agriculture. But it's not only about those sectors, but like for example, the example from the charcoal demonstrates, it's very much linked to other sectors as well, like how do we produce the energy in the developing world. And then linked to the just transition, it's also that how do people make their living? So in that sense, how do we create jobs for the youth in Africa who can no longer make their living on the land because of the limitations we are putting on them, plus then of course the population growth, which puts a lot of pressure on that land they already are managing. So those are my key messages.
Good, thank you, Anna. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thank you, Tina. But if I could be allowed a minute, maybe to first touch on the regulation. I didn't get the opportunity to highlight some of the opportunities that I see with the regulation, but also the challenges, if that is allowed. And then I would proceed to the key messages. And I think looking at the EU regulations, it really talks of creating incentives for a transition, towards more sustainable use of the natural resources, of course, contributing to preserving more the intact forests, boosting the market opportunities for sustainable products, and eliminating unfair competition from unsustainable producers that are exporting to the EU market. It also highlights the issue of, addressing product traceability, as operators will be required to correct the geographical coordinates on the land where the products, are collected, the ones they press on the market. And also an enforcement mechanism will be put in member states to ensure that there is this compliance, meaning traceability is very key. But however, from where I sit as a smallholder farmer, Tina and other colleagues, I see the proposed regulation will eliminate most smallholder farmers, especially in Africa, those in the coffee sector, but also in the cocoa, as Marco mentioned, and Maya during the presentation, that cocoa is grown mostly in West Africa, but also coffee, across Africa. And when you look at the incentives that are being talked of, it does not offer a better price for a smallholder farmer. It doesn't give the true value of the coffee, of the cocoa that the farmers are producing. When you read the regulation, for example, the resource envelope of 1,000 million euros that is mentioned, I don't know whether I'm correct on the figures. The fund is for setting up the audit systems and the training, and there is little, or if it is there, targeting smallholder farmers. I'm also not very sure whether as Africans or smallholder farmers from Africa have been given an opportunity to discuss this or to critique this regulation as, of course, bilateral partners to the EU. Possibly, I don't know whether during the EU-AU meeting such a discussions happened, because from the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation that I represent, we've not been part of the discussions yet. But I would recommend that there is need for deeper consultations and discussions, especially from the African actors. And in terms of the challenges, as smallholder farmers, of course, we consider forest degradation and deforestation as a serious problem. And we've been at the center of all these. But I really have high doubts on how much can be achieved through this regulation, especially on due diligence systems. These usually require a heavy monitoring system. For example, we have such systems in place. I foresee a situation where we will have increased challenges related to non-compliance. So we really need to critically think through this and see how we can address it. And again, when you look at the regulation, while it may have a noble intention, there's also need to reflect on how and by whom the provision of the technical support this regulation requires, especially at smallholder level. How will it be done? I'm not sure if smallholder farmers have been part and parcel of this process, at least maybe from the EU. I don't know whether they've been part and parcel of all these processes, especially for ownership and implementation. And lastly, on the messages, sorry, I've taken long. On the key messages, I think, again, the regulation leaves the root causes of deforestation. You can't be talking of deforestation without looking at what are the root causes, especially in countries of Africa where I come from. Issues to do with poverty, the poor standards of our landscape, governance, forest laws enforcement, all these need to be equally addressed. And lastly, the other issue is on impact vis-a-vis what I would call the return on investment. Maybe another better word could be used. Because when you look at the statistics, the EU, for example, mentioned that this intervention would save about 71,920 hectares of forest annually by 2030. And according to Deforestation by FAO 2020 Global States of Forest, the annual deforestation is about 10 million hectares, meaning the impact is minimal. Therefore, there is also a need to really revisit this critically and be able to assess the impact in a broader sense, more especially to the smallholder farmers and other value chain actors who deliver their livelihoods on forests. Thank you, and over to you, Tina.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was a bit more than one message, but they were very important messages. Maybe Leah, what is your key message?
Thank you very much. I start to build on that, as we see that there are coming different expectations from the different initiatives. So I think one and most is that when we are looking at as deforestation initiative is the product-based due diligence requirement, basically. So it's really important to check the alignment and the proportionality with the broader EU level sustainable corporate governance due diligence, that we are not building on double layers on that sense. But then also building on a little bit what Elizabeth said, that is the deforestation part. But we need to understand that we still leave the room also for the increasing the level and the development from the smart mix of measures point of view, that as deforestation is a multi-level issue, thinking about agroforestry, intercropping development, which could actually take into account the social aspects and drive to the sustainable future of farming. So that then thorough assessment and testing viable solution is important, that we need to support the smallholder farmers. Definitely. So this is the combination basically which enables us to to identify the drivers and root causes, and enables us to stop the leakage from the different market expectations.
Good, thank you, Lea. And I noted that Petra Lehtonen had also indicated that the drivers are moving, that the statistics used in the studies that were mentioned earlier by Maya and Marco, they are already slightly different. Julie, what would be your key message to the EU?
Two things. One is simplicity. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. And then the second part is technical assistance and NGO support. So this is to enable smallholder farmers and others to adhere to the standards, and also to increase training to an industrial scale to improve smallholder farmer productivity.
Good, thank you. We have very little time for questions, but I wonder if there are any questions from the audience at this stage. I'm checking now the chat as well. In the chat, there is a reminder from the Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry here in Finland. There will be event next week on Thursday, the 31st, which is organized by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry kohti kestäviä ruokajärjestelmiä. So it is also continuing a dialogue on the systemic changes for food. And you can find in the chat the invitation for that. Otherwise, it's interesting. Here is a question from Basanta Gautam, and this is directed to Marco. Like, what is a scenario for wood supply now in the EU, dealing with the war in Ukraine, because Russia was an important supply for wood products to the EU. This goes a little bit outside of the the EU regulation, but it is an important question.
Why question to me? There must be more knowledgeable persons about the wood markets here in this meeting. But I know that, for instance, in the case of Finland, 10% of the wood that is used by the Finnish forest industry is imported from Russia. That's now gone, and similar things are happening in other parts of Europe. And what I'm listening, at least the Finnish companies saying, I mean, partly they will replace it by increasing logging in national forests, and the part is exporting them from some other parts of the world. And of course, one reason is that also the markets may decline because of the crisis, economic crisis, and all what's kind of following this the war. So most likely there may not be a very high increase in demand, at least in the short term, which then in a way kind of helps bring some relief on this kind of the markets or the production doesn't have to increase so fast.
Good, thank you, Marco, for jumping in. We are getting close to the end. I think that all the panelists underline the just transition, the fairness in this, support needed for smallholders, and this means technical assistance, support through different actors, NGOs, producer organizations. As Elizabeth mentioned, the regulation should not become exclusive, but more kind of inclusive way of encouraging forest-friendly production methods. I would like to thank all the panelists, the presenters, all the participants. I saw 71 participants at the best moment, which is quite a lot for this kind of a webinar. I think that we'll continue with this kind of a topics, and definitely when the regulatory basis will go forward, there will be definitely issues to be discussed. I would like to invite now Juha Ruipu to say the final words. Please, Juha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you all for the information what we have heard today and shared by chat or panel discussions. As a chairperson of Finger's food security group, I just highlight few things. It is a positive news around that Finland is now increasing funding for the climate purposes. And I assume that we have had a huge amount of topics in this seminar, which could be those which should be highlighted. And that is a good thing there. One thing what was raised by Maya and others was also the situation there in global market, and the situation there in Russia and Ukraine. I would say that they will have a huge impact of the deforestation at the moment, because the commodity flows will change, and that has a huge impact for all the food market and wood market. On that sense, like Markku mentioned, it is basically on forestry side, but anyhow, it is also highlighted there in food market. One thing which has been very realistic way to say that in this discussion that there has been a lot of different kind of voluntary schemes, verification, certification systems. Now we have a huge package of different kind of legislation coming from the EU level. On taxonomy, on due diligence, on deforestation or forest degradation. So there's plenty of changes in legislative point of view. But perhaps the point what Markus just mentioned there is that there's a willingness to have a law. And the reason is to have sanctions for certain companies or certain persons, but the simplicity or practical solutions. What is the forest? Why we took a forest as a highlighted point? It is one of those things that which could be easily taken up as a point there, where the forest is not the only thing. There's the biodiversity, there's nature things what is there, but I assume that the point what was raised by Julia there is the point of sustainability in all those three dimensions, like a social, ecological, economical point of view. It is depending from all those things on the issue. And then we come to the implementation on the consumer's level. What is first of all the awareness of the things? Then what is the willingness of pay and an ability to pay for the true cost of the food, like Yuri mentioned there in such a discussion. That is the basic thing there. And what was raised by Elizabeth and quite many others is that we must have a traceability. So to build the trust from the food production to the consumers, that is so important to have the trust in the whole food chain. So thank you all from my side, and it has been a great pleasure to listen to discussion, and hopefully we will continue this discussion later on, like Tina mentioned earlier. So thank you all.
Thank you, Juha. And I would like to mention Kirsi Kaikkonen and Jose Valdivia, who has been supporting and putting all this webinar together. Thank you for you too. Without you, this would have not been realized. And thanks for the participant. This really shows that the topic is actual and of great importance. Have a nice day. Thank you.